Welcome to Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and me, Jim Cunningham.
Jim.
Jono, how you doing,
Hey,
buddy?
we are doing well by doing good. Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Yes, thanks for having us back. We are in season 4, episode 22, which means there's only 2 more episodes after this one, I think. 22, 23, 24. Yep. So today we're going to listen to chapter 22 of The Miser's Dream. But first, we're going to go back and listen to a couple minutes of our conversation with delightful Julie Eng.
We chatted with Julie about all kinds of stuff, but specifically about growing up in a magic store. How cool would that be? The first question was if she had a favorite trick to sell.
Was there a favorite thing you loved to demonstrate? Was there something, if you knew for sure you could sell, if you get this in front of somebody, you knew you'd sell it?
So that's the name of the game. My job was to sell, and I had to learn how to sell. My father taught me how to do the demos, though. Like I had to sell the demos, and I must admit, I think he took advantage that at a time when I'm a young girl, I was a kid, I was a teenager, but I looked younger than I was. So it looked like even more impossible. Like, how could this little kid, surprise you with this deck of cards? You must buy it. Like, he liked that idea of making it appear a little more simple or direct. And I mean, I grew up with this stuff too, so I was very comfortable with it. So handling cards or handling the coins or these very strange boxes and brass things and, colorful copper things, cups and balls or floating all over the place. I mean, that's what I did. And I learned his demo routines. My dad had worked out these sets, and these sets were designed to have sort of like a beginning, middle, end, as all shows have. But he also designed it so it's sort of like easy, kind of not so easy, little sleight of hand. And so there was a range of skills that you could also sort of target. I mean, I would be doing this all day long. And in the summertime in Victoria, it was packed all day long. Between 12 and 5, it was always packed because tourists would come through not only in busloads, but in the cruise ships. So you'd have thousands of people milling about your city for this period of time. And they had money burning a hole in their pocket. They're here in Victoria. What are they going to do? They've been trapped on a ship. They got to spend some money. I was happy to help them do that. So I remember specifically hordes of people coming in, not 2 or 3, but in the summertime, like, easily groups of 20 or more would come in at any given time. And our shop was in this narrow format. They'd all funnel down to the counter, and it was like the stage. And then they were the audience. And so you do the demo and everyone understands it. After the demo, it's now time to buy. So what can I get for you? What did you like? How did you like that one? I think that would work for you, and so that was how we learned how to sell. And you had to read people, I could tell who could do what, you could just kind of tell, you learn to read your audience. And don't forget, my mandate in that particular job was to sell a trick, like where. So you asked me if I had favorite ones. For sure I did. And it was because they had some kind of an impact. It was something that we could pull out and you could sort of handle, that was important. The magic had to be handled when I was in the store. I was a very shy kid, and I found that the being in front of people, even though I was quite shy, gave me that natural ability to see, some confidence, to think on my feet, to have to deal with certain situations. All of those things are life lessons as far as I'm concerned.
What do you miss most about your time in the magic store?
The shop was always really, unpredictable. You never knew who you're going to meet, who you're going to run into. But I think, the fun of what a simple magic trick can do, like with 2 strangers, This person comes in, maybe a mom comes in with her young daughter, and they see me behind the counter, and they're like, well, we're really shy. We're thinking about this idea of maybe learning a magic trick, for something maybe for school. And I love the idea that my small contribution to that young woman's, idea of what magic can and cannot be, And to see her eyes light up and to see the possibility in her mind spark, well, that's the stuff that is, for me, real magic. You know, you can touch a life and give something of a different kind of gift. And I don't get that in a day-to-day experience anymore. You know, that idea of just coming across unusual situations, and you never know who you're going to meet in a magic store. So I do miss that. And I miss the idea of that magical place, like that place where people love to come. We were not a store where you would have to do your taxes. We were not a store that was going to give you grief over a mortgage. You know, it was about fun. It was about delivering, literally selling fun. And I have to say that that's a unique experience I haven't had ever anywhere else.
There's something magic about a magic store, isn't there?
There really is. And, you know, I'm all for these sort of internet magic shops, but I worry that that is going to kill the brick and mortar shops, which I grew up with. And you know, and from my perspective, it was really great to have a guy like Larry Kalo or
Yeah.
Fred Beisch when I went in there and said, I saw this and this is what I want, and have them say, you know, I know you and where you're at in your development. This is pretty advanced, and you should, you know, how about just having that sort of interaction with a knowledgeable professional is good. And I worry that we're going to lose that. So it's kind of cool to talk to Julie Heng about that experience, because it may go the way of the dodo.
Well, yeah. Although they have, they're working on recreating the dodo from DNA.
Yeah, I like that.
But
Well-
you've even said, if it weren't for Larry Kalo saying, "Hey, Cunningham, the book you've been waiting for your whole life showed up,"
Exactly.
who knows where you would have gone in magic?
Well, and you know, the weird twists of fate. So there's that. Then you and I become friends, and you get the magic bug kind of through me and Bill Arnold. But really, I infected you
Yeah.
with both Jack the Ripper and magic, and here we are, 4 seasons into a podcast because of your infection. I don't take credit. I'm just
Nice.
saying. I coughed on you, and look where we are.
And this could have been a Jack the Ripper podcast. It would have
It could have been that simple. In fact, I'm not entirely sure that we shouldn't start a Jack the Ripper podcast.
Well, there's a pretty good one out there called Rippercast, and I would, if you're interested in Jack the Ripper, dig into Rippercast. It's a fascinating community. Some of them are so smart, and they've just put all their focus on this odd little area. Anyway, that's Rippercast. If I remember, I'll put a link in the show notes.
Please do, because that's where I go to the show notes and follow the link. So please put it in there, because I had not heard of that until this very moment in time.
Oh, well, someday I'll tell you about going to the Jack the Ripper convention in Baltimore or something. But that's not what we're here today to talk about. I was so glad that Julie came on the show. Her life has changed quite a bit since then. She is now in charge of Genie Magazine and Genie Enterprises.
Wow.
So she's overseeing all of that. I believe that kicks off in 2025. And who knows what changes are going to happen in that magazine, but also in Genie Enterprises and where they're going to go and what she's going to do. Couldn't have a better person be heading that. She is smart and charming and driven and knows magic and can deal with people. I can't wait to see what she comes up with.
Me either. She's a triple threat.
She is. She is.
Yeah.
And,
So good on her.
and there'll be a link in the show notes if you want to forward on to any of your friends that little segment that we clipped out. They can look at that as its own little video in case you want to, hey, here's some cool ideas I want you to look at. Here's something I really loved.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
speaking of things that I love,
Yes.
you know, we
It's me,
surprise
isn't
each
it?
other every time with what we're going to do. And I this will surprise you. You may have never heard of this thing.
And you go first, right? Because
I'm going to go first because it's
an even.
it's even. 422.
All right.
It's even. You do odd, I do even.
I am odd.
And I am even. It's a little movie made by writer-director Peter Bogdanovich that he made in the early 80s called They All Laughed.
Mm.
Have you ever heard of it, Jim?
No.
No. It stars John Ritter, Ben Gazzara, Audrey Hepburn, and others.
Wow, that's a cast.
That's a cast. And he made it as sort of a love letter to New York. It has a certain 30s screwball feel to it, but not to the degree that What's Up doc did because it's more grounded than that. And it's about John Ritter and Ben Gazzara play private detectives who've been hired to follow some women, two different cases. And in both instances, they fall in love with the woman that they're supposed to be tailing.
Odyssey Detective Agency, we never sleep. Could you hold, please?
Amy. Hi, Amy. Is Leon busy?
Thank you. Charlie, where the hell are the reports on the Martin case?
Oh, well, we got him, Amy. Any put call?
Yeah, Mandy, Sherry, Terry.
Terry, Sherry's sister Terry.
The same.
Interesting. Any calls for me, Amy?
Just your father, Charles.
Oh, his father again. Good. Why don't you call him back and ruin your day? God.
Charles.
Hello, Mr. Leondopoulos. How are you?
Where the hell are the reports on the Martin case?
Yes, well, it's been a little hectic lately, Leon.
We got him, Leon. They just ain't typed yet.
Then we don't got him, Arthur. The typing isn't some middle-class bureaucratic curlicue, and I would really prefer not to hear exasperation in anyone's tone this morning. Because I'm on the narrow edge of a precipice, and even the smallest additional irritation could cause me to slip over into a gaping abyss, out of which I gravely doubt it would be possible for me to climb.
It has a charming score of songs from the American Songbook, including Frank Sinatra singing They All Laughed. It has some original music that Peter Bogdanovich co-wrote and that the actress Colleen Camp, I believe, certainly sings. I don't know if she wrote any of them. Patty Hansen, the model, is in it. She's charming and funny. And tragically, it's the last screen appearance of Dorothy Stratton.
Oh, man.
Who they made the movie Star 80 about. Right after she made the movie, her husband killed her and himself, which threw the director who was in love with her into a tizzy and made it difficult for him to continue. He was editing the movie when it happened.
Oh, boy.
So the movie kind of came out. It didn't go anywhere, and he bought it back and tried to release it himself, and that didn't go anywhere because he wasn't in a good place. And it's now finally come around again, and you can find it on streaming services. And it's a charming 90-minute souffle of these characters crisscrossing through New York. Manhattan feels like a small town in it because people keep running into each other. And it's just charming. John Ritter has never been more charming than he is in this movie. He's the Peter Bogdanovich surrogate. I don't know if you're a fan of Ben Gazzara.
I am.
Who has a very minimalistic acting style.
Yeah.
But when he looks at Audrey Hepburn, you feel like he's in love with Audrey Hepburn. And it's one of her last movies. I'm not sure where Robin and Marion, if that comes before or after it.
Oh,
but,
I love that film. And let's just say this. If you look at Audrey Hepburn and you're not in love, get behind me because she is so wonderful in everything she's ever been in, including the movie you just referenced, Robin and Marion, which this line, I was right to love you all those years ago.
Oh, now you're going to make me cry.
Great.
Great
Is that
movie. Your goal?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay. Mission accomplished. Anyway, I love that this time around. It's called They All Laughed. Ben Gazzara, Audrey Hepburn, John Ritter, in a movie written and directed by Peter Bogdanovich. It's just a charm fest from beginning to end.
Well, I will. That would fit in the Venn diagram of movies my wife and I could enjoy together, which it's surprisingly small.
All right, so that's me. What about you?
You know, I'm going to confess that I am late to the game with this, but I'm often late to the game. I don't know. Have I mentioned on this podcast that I'm a big Bruce Springsteen fan? Has that come up? Huh?
Let me think. Well, someone did suggest if we don't want to do the Eugene drinking game anymore, we could just do the Bruce Springsteen drinking game.
There you go.
Yeah, but I got a letter from the American Medical Association saying that's a really bad idea.
Well, you know, I'm a big fan. I'm also a big, huge fan of President Obama. And the two of them have a podcast together. And I knew this existed because my son, Jake, reached out to me, I'm going to say when this first came out, so 4 or 5 years ago, and said, Dad, Bruce Springsteen, President Obama have a podcast together. It's so you should be listening. And for some reason, I didn't. It didn't take. I was busy with other stuff. And so I have gone back now because I have a long commute on the weekends, and I have been listening to Bruce Springsteen and President Obama in their podcast, Renegades.
I'm
On the surface, Bruce and I don't have a lot in common. He's a white guy from a small town in Jersey. I'm a black guy of mixed race, born in Hawaii. He's a rock and roll icon. I'm not as cool.
I was trying to remember the first time we actually met. Probably was in 2008 during the campaign. You came, was it in Michigan or Ohio?
I have no recall.
In our own ways, Bruce and I have been on parallel journeys, looking for a way to connect our own individual searches for meaning, truth, and community with the larger story of America. And over the course of a few days, all just a few miles from where he grew up, we talked. It made sense if you're going to be a rock and roll star, you're going to play the guitar.
Guitars were cheap. I could actually work a job, which I did. I saved up $18, bought a cheap guitar. Then I started to learn some Beatles stuff. I learned Twist and Shout.
I am delighted with the conversation. I'm delighted with their friendship. I'm delighted by the entire subject matter so far. It's so great to hear two people that I really admire talking to each other about things I'm interested in. I mean, it's just two very bright individuals who, and I'll admit, share my sort of outlook on the world, or I share theirs. Let's be real. And it's just, I'm loving it. So if you have not heard this yet, it is absolutely worth your time, especially if you have any kind of commute in your life. It's funny, it's insightful. There's going to be some Springsteen music there. It's really, really great. I'm loving Renegades with the boss and the
other boss.
Yeah, exactly.
The two bosses. I will put a link in the show notes to that.
Have you listened to it, John?
I've never heard of it, Jim.
You're kidding.
I am not kidding. For some
Are
reason.
you telling me that I came up with a podcast that you are unaware of?
I am absolutely saying that because that is the absolute truth. And I don't know why your son Jake has kept it from me, but I blame Jake. I always blame Jake when it comes down to it.
Let the record show that when I asked about Jack the Ripper, you were Johnny on the spot with a podcast about Jack the Ripper. And this one surprises you. I'm thrilled that I can surprise you at this late date in our friendship and podcast. There's something I can bring to you because you're constantly bringing it to me.
Here's something else you can bring because we had a request to hear your Ray Fiennes story from last episode. So what is your Ray Fiennes story?
Okay, so my youngest daughter had her semester abroad in London. And I told all my kids, you know, if you pick the right location for your semester abroad, we will come. The rest of us will come join you. My oldest daughter picked South Africa. And I said, you know, I'd love to see South Africa, but I can't do 20 hours on a plane. I just can't. So we didn't go. And then my son chose an internship over going out of the country. But
so
my
did you go every day on his internship, the whole family, and just sit around and watch
Absolutely. Just followed him around. It was fun for us, not so much for him or the people he was interning with, but we had a great time. But my youngest chose London, and I said, well, we're going. And so 11 of us in waves flew to London, and we were there for 3 weeks. Now, from where we live here, you fly direct to London, but you do it overnight.
Okay.
And so when you land in London, you have not really slept. You caught a cat nap if you're lucky. I wasn't. And you get off the plane at what is essentially 3 or 4 in the morning to your body. And then the sort of conventional wisdom is, for God's sake, don't sleep because it'll goof you. Stay awake until you have to go to bed at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. So we had not seen my youngest, and it was my wife and I and my son Jake in the first wave. And so she was waiting for us at the hotel when we got there and standing outside. And it was one of those moments as a parent where you just go, I'll never forget this. I'll never forget looking at my little kid standing there after all these months. And there she is. And of course, the hotel is not ready to let you check in. So we checked our bags, and my daughter said, well, we're really close to Hyde Park. why don't we get a cup of coffee and we'll go sit in Hyde Park? And it was a beautiful day. It was about 70 degrees and sunny. So we went to Hyde Park, and it's gorgeous, and I'm dozy, and I can't, and she said, don't, Dad, don't. You got to just walk it off. So we walked all through Hyde Park to Buckingham Palace, and we stood in line to watch the changing of the guards for about 45 minutes until my son came back and said, there's a sign right here that says there's not going to be a changing of the guard today. So we walked from Buckingham Palace across London Bridge to Bankside. We had lunch down there. We took a look at Shakespeare's Globe, and we're coming back now. And it's about 2 p.m. And the difference between, I think, American movie or TV stars and British TV stars is, in Britain, they treat those people, and those people act like they're, human beings.
Right. It's a job.
We're here in America, there's layers and layers of people you would have to get to if you wanted to bump into Harrison Ford. Good luck. But in England, they just are out there, and they walk the streets, and nobody says anything. And we're coming towards St. Paul's Cathedral, and I look up, and coming towards me is Ralph Fiennes. And he's in a suit, and he's got a backpack, and he's got his earbuds in. And normally I'm pretty cool in situations like that because thanks to you and some of my other work, I've had a chance to meet some celebrities, and I'd like to think I'm pretty cool. I can only say we had walked about 150 miles that day, and it was the middle of the night, according to my body. And before I could do anything, I went, hey. It was out of my mouth before I could stop it. And Ralph Fiennes looked at me like, oh, for the love of Pete, and kind of nodded at me and just kept going. And then my son, who was behind me like 10 feet, came running up and said, Dad, I think that was Voldemort right there. I said, it absolutely was. They just walked the streets. I saw Judi Dench. I saw Kenneth Branagh and Judi Dench unveil a statue of Shakespeare, and literally they're just right there. There's no security, there's no entourage. They're just people over there, which I think is refreshing. But in any case, my Ralph Fiennes story, if he ever sees me again, or if I ever have the great, amazing fortune to work with him, I'll tell him that story, and I'm sure he'll go, oh yeah, I remember you horrible American.
Well, or not. You reminded me of my own London story where we were taking a walking tour, lovely walking tour. There's a company called London Walks, if you're ever there.
I love it.
They do wonderful tours. And we were taking a Beatles tour with what is considered to be the greatest Beatles fan in the world. And he does a very nice tour. He's a very shy man, but he is the greatest Beatles fan in the world. And Paul McCartney knows him and waves to him and gives him stuff. And we were across the street from Abbey Road, where the crosswalk is, and people were annoying the neighbors by people in our group were going out, and other tourists going out and taking their picture, which the people in the neighborhood just hate. They just hate it. And he told the story about that he was there once, and he saw Paul McCartney heading over to Abbey Road Studios, and he was crossing the street, and there was an American group trying to take the photo, and he went up to the woman who was taking it and said, would you like me to take that for you? And she screamed at him, no, I've got it. And he went, well, he shrugged and went into Abbey Road. And this British tour guide was saying, somewhere there's a woman who could have had her picture taken by Paul McCartney, and she was so rude. He was being nice, and she was just rude. So they do walk the streets. You can.
It's amazing to me that people of that magnitude, your Paul McCartneys, your Ralph Fiennes, your Kenneth Branaghs, your Judi Denches, are just available, and they're kind, and they'll, Ralph Fiennes kind of big time me, but we were in the middle of a crosswalk at that moment. So, and I don't blame him. But it was, that's my Ralph Fiennes story for what it's worth.
Well, I'm glad we got that. So all the listeners who were waiting for that from the last episode.
I hope it was worth it. We should read though. We should just, we should.
We've gone far afield, haven't we?
Yeah, we really have. But can I just put a button on the London Walks thing? If you are going to London, before you go, grab that London Walks website. Can you put that in the show notes?
I will put that in the show
Walks
notes.
It's phenomenal. And like John said, they get experts in their field, not a rum-dum like me, but real people who have expert knowledge of whatever the subject matter is.
For example, some nights the Ripper Walk is hosted by Don Rumbelow, who wrote one of the best books on the Ripper, and who was a policeman in the London system. Yeah, they have great people, and the walks are great.
Great guides. The walks are great, and it doesn't matter what you're interested in. The Beatles, Jack the Ripper,
Harry
archaeology,
Potter, Sherlock Holmes,
whatever. Shakespeare, Dickens, Winston Churchill, architecture, whatever. They got a walk on it, and it's not expensive, but it is fantastic.
Yeah,
so
they're really good.
That London Walks into your system if you're heading in that direction.
Okay.
So now, we got to start reading, for the love of God. We're reading the third book in the series, The Miser's Dream. John, it falls to you to remind us of what happened in chapter 21.
All right. Eli's continuing his explanation of the crime. There is no movie. Eli lays out the scenario that the projectionist Tyler figured out, that someone was posing as him trying to sell the movie that didn't exist. And to talk to that person was a short walk right down to the manager's office.
Dun, dun, dun.
Chapter 22. Tracy, seated on an aisle, looked first left, then right, quickly assessing her situation. To her left, one seat over, sat Deirdre. To her right, walking up the aisle, was Homicide Detective Fred Hutton. She turned and saw Detective Wright headed toward her, coming down the aisle. With all avenues of escape apparently closed, she settled back into her seat and turned her 1,000-watt smile on me. "That's one theory," she said, turning and crossing her long legs into the aisle. "But it's a long shot." "It is that," I said. "Want me to expand on it?" She shrugged, casually. "I suspect there was a confrontation of some kind in your office," I continued, first to her and then looking out at the rest of the now rapt audience. "Perhaps Tyler demanded the money back, and you gave it to him. And then you thought better of it and shot him in the back as he exited your office." This came from Detective Wright, who had taken a casual pose, perched on the armrest of the seat across from Tracy's on the aisle. "It's a small-caliber gun," I said, picking up the story. "The bullets didn't pass through Tyler, but he's smart enough to realize he's got internal bleeding, and there's a crazy woman with a gun. So he races back up to the safety of the booth, tosses the envelope of money on the table, and closes and locks the door from the inside." Tracy looked up at me with a smile that could only be called inscrutable. I turned from her and headed back down the aisle toward the stage. "Now, Tracy has a problem," I said, turning back to the now very attentive group. "She can't get into the booth to get the money because the booth only locks from the inside. A privacy thing for the projectionist who might be using the toilet, and the gun is not in the booth. So the police are going to look around to determine where the fatal shots were fired. She needs to steer them away from her office to get them as far away from her as she could, because she's seen enough crime shows. She knows there's bound to be at least a little blood evidence somewhere in her office." "We have a team in there right now looking for just that," said Homicide Detective Fred Hutton. His pose was the opposite of the relaxed one taken by his partner. He stood in the center of the aisle, his arms crossed, looking like a golem in an off-the-rack gray suit. "She needs to put some distance between the method and the effect. What we call in the business a little time misdirection," I said. "Quentin, how would you define time misdirection?" He didn't even have to give it a moment's thought. "Oh, that's a lovely ploy. I think it was Harry Lorraine who coined the phrase. You see, you make the audience think something happened here, but it actually happened earlier, or later, over there. Ortiz called it temporal separation, because you're using time to separate the cause from the effect. Add in the spatial separation, and you've got a very powerful method indeed. It's a very common ploy, for example, in the bending of metal utensils, spoons and the like. However, that's only the tip of the iceberg, as it were, he added. Yes, exactly. That's her problem. How to steer attention away from her office and radically change the question from where was Tyler James shot, and instead make the entire case about the question, how did the killer get out of a locked projection booth? No small problem. What's a girl to do? I was surprised this came from Sherry Lisbon, who no longer seemed bored with the proceedings. If the girl in question is a former NCAA athlete who played ball semi-professionally in Japan, I responded, she's going to use her natural gifts to get the gun into the booth. I paused and looked at Tracy, who gave me nothing in return. But once again, I'm getting ahead of myself, I said. Let me back up. I took 2 steps backward and leaned against the stage, my little visual joke producing 0 reactions. You see, as it turns out, a quick Google check will tell you that this award-winning athlete had a bit of a gambling problem and ended up being released from her college prior to graduation. I got canned, Tracy said, without any sarcasm or rancor, just a straight-ahead fact of life. Your phraseology, not mine. But she was still a skillful player, and there was money to be made playing in Japan, so off she went. Unfortunately, while there was money to be made, there were also bets to be placed. After a short stint playing some long odds, she was asked to leave that position as well. And then she made what was probably the only good choice she's made in a long series of bad decisions. Unless the courts made it for her, Deirdre added. That's always a possibility. Regardless, she came to Minnesota, land at 10,000 treatment centers. Gambling addiction, Chip Kavanaugh said, clicking his tongue and shaking his head sagely. That's a tough one. I waited to see where the punchline landed, but there seemed to be nothing else to his interruption, so I continued. She went through treatment, and when she was done, she got a job managing a movie theater. I looked at Tracy for confirmation. Right? In a general sort of way, sure, she said. Unfortunately, and I don't have specifics here, I think she must have suffered a relapse of some kind, because before she knew it, she'd run up some big gambling debts with, I'm just speculating here, some people who didn't qualify as Minnesota nice. Creeps, Tracy added, total creeps. So she has a problem. A big gambling debt and no way to pay it off. Until Tyler tells her in passing about his side business. Randall leaned forward, excited. Yeah. So she gets the idea to try and sell a fake movie, he said, with the plan to keep the deposit. She'll pay off her gambling debts, and no one will be any the wiser, because who's going to report being robbed while trying to buy a black market movie? Now it was Chip Kavanaugh's turn to lean forward. But Tyler figured it out, he said, picking up the narrative from Randall. He must have confronted her about it and took back the money she so desperately needed. So she shot him, Randall added. I had no choice, Tracy said sharply. And then her eyes went a little wide as she looked out at the assembled group. Like everyone else, she had gotten caught up in the narrative. Sherry Lisbon shook her head disapprovingly. Dear, no one in this room is buying that for one blessed second. Randall Glendower slumped back in his seat, perplexed. He looked up at me. That's all well and good, but how did she get the gun into the booth? Clearly she didn't use a monkey, Chip said, throwing a look in Quentin's direction. I shook my head. No, sorry, Quentin, she didn't use a monkey. Instead, She used the skills she had been developing for years. I headed up the aisle toward where Detective Wright was still perched on an armrest. "Detective, what do your notes say about this back exit here by the screen?" I asked, motioning to the curtained exit at the foot of the aisle. Wright pulled out his notebook and flipped through some pages, finally landing on the one he was looking for. "The suspect appears to have exited via the south rear exit," he read slowly, "and stepped away from the building about 2 feet. Subject must have seen or heard something and returned to the building to seek an alternative form of egress." "That's one way of looking at it," I said, holding out my hand to him. It took him a moment to figure out what I wanted, but a second later, I was holding the small gun in my hand. "Another idea is she came down here, stepped out the back door, packed some snow around the gun until it was reasonably round, returned to the auditorium, and threw it. Through that hole, up there." I mimed forming the snowball and making the throw with the small gun. They all turned and looked at the square hole up in the back wall of the theater. It suddenly seemed very far away. "That's a tough throw for a basketball player," Chip Kavanaugh said sadly. "Even a really good basketball player." "Yes, but you're making the same assumption I made about Tracy, because of her height and because of my woeful ignorance about sports in general." "What's that?" "That she played basketball." I turned to Tracy, who was staring straight ahead. "Tracy, what sport did you play in college and in Japan?" She sat silently for a long moment and then said quietly, "Softball." "What position?" Another long pause. "Catcher." I turned away from her and back to Chip and the rest of the group, gesturing toward the small windows on the back wall. "An impossible throw for a basketball player, probably, but a softball catcher can throw far. They can throw hard, and they can throw precisely." I took a seat on an armrest and glanced over at Tracy. You see, I made the common mistake of thinking just because she's tall, Tracy must have been a basketball player. Had I been paying attention, I would have noticed how often she used baseball terms in real life, but never basketball terms. "I will give you all the money in his wallet right now if you can name one basketball term." This came from Deirdre, who was gesturing toward her husband while giving me a sly smile. "I think we both know how that would end," I said. "Badly," she said. Homicide Detective Fred Hutton looked confused at the exchange, but relieved the contents of his wallet were for the moment safe. "As I was saying," I continued, "my mistake about Tracy's chosen sport was corrected in passing during a conversation with Mrs. Tyler James. Thank you for that." I doffed an invisible hat to Mrs. James, and she looked back annoyed, clearly not remembering her referring to Tracy as the Bad News Bears washout. That got me thinking, and I did a quick check on the internet, heeding some oft-heard advice from my late Aunt Alice, I said, holding up my phone. I looked over to where Harry was seated. He gave me a warm smile. "My Aunt Alice," I continued, "used to warn me all the time about my actions being set down somewhere in an unseen permanent record. She was a big fan of that concept, the permanent record. And that's a pretty fair definition of the internet. Tracy's gambling scandals, the college and Japanese versions, are well documented." Randall Glendower had stood up and turned in his seat, squinting up at the projection booth. He pivoted back toward me. "She threw the snowball with the gun in it through that little hole?" "Yes," I said, using the strength and precision she had developed as a semi-pro softball catcher. "The snowball hit the floor of the booth and the snow went flying, which explains the small puddles of water which were found once we got to the booth." He considered this for a moment and then turned. "But what about Clifford Thomas?" "Yes, which brings me to my next point. That snowball also led to the death of Clifford Thomas. I looked at Tracy, but she returned my gaze with a stony expression, clearly having learned a lesson from her last outburst. The best I can figure, I continued, is Clifford Thomas came by our magic shop to return some books he'd signed for my Uncle Harry. We weren't open, so he left them next door, here, at the theater. I'm guessing Tracy recognized him from the times he stopped by to talk to Tyler. Maybe he invited her to stop by his house sometime. I'm not clear on the details, but I do know he wasn't shy about letting fans, particularly good-looking fans, into his house. Randall Glendower nodded as I spoke and then cut in. Then she went to his house, maybe to see if he'd figured out Tyler's murder. He was a mystery writer after all, and he was the one who would put down the $75,000 deposit. Perhaps Tyler mentioned that when he confronted Tracy. Perhaps, I agreed, turning back to Tracy. You're sitting with him in his library, behind that fancy moving bookcase. Then maybe he left the room for a minute to get drinks or something, and your curiosity got the better of you. I think you took a peek at the manuscript of his new book on the desk, and the title probably freaked you out. What was the title? Randall was leaning forward, as was Chip Kavanaugh. Even Sherry Lisbon appeared to be sitting on the edge of her seat. Only Mrs. Tyler James and Gunner seemed disengaged from the narrative, now that neither one appeared to be a suspect in either murder. I'm just speculating, I said, but from the list of titles he kept in his desk, only one would have really caught your eye. A Snowball's Chance. I walked up the aisle and looked down at her. Did you think he'd solved the crime and written it up as a novel? Tracy didn't meet my eye. I didn't think, I just acted. That's right, you're impulsive, I said, remembering the kiss she had planted on me after driving her home from the hospital. You picked up the letter opener. Clifford Thomas came back to the room, and that was that. That was that. I turned and headed back to the front of the room, then stopped suddenly and turned around. Oh, and you took the manuscript, which wasn't about Tyler's murder, was it? Tracy shook her head. No, it was about ice fishing and a murder using a frozen fish or something. I didn't finish it. Mysteries are stupid. Not to worry. I'm sure the prison library stocks many other interesting genres, I said, as Detective Wright stepped forward with a pair of handcuffs.
All right, so that is the explanation. Tracy has been arrested for the murder of Tyler. We know why that happened. It's explained why Clifford Thomas was killed, because she saw that his book was titled A Snowball's Chance, and she thought that it was referencing the snowball that she made to throw the gun into the projection booth from way down in the auditorium. And I should say that Mr. Jim Cunningham here was the one who, when I told him the story before it was written, originally, I don't know what she was going to be. I was going to have her be a pitcher. And you said, no, for what she's doing, a catcher would be a much better person because they have a much stronger arm and they can throw with much more precision to anywhere, as opposed to a pitcher who's throwing with precision to one place.
Yeah, that I think is true. Although pitchers, no, if you're a pitcher and you're listening and you feel like I have dissed you, suck it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all done. That's totally done. So anyway, we've got 2 more chapters to do. We're going to do chapter 23 next time. And if you're not following the book, but you think, should I tune in anyway? Yeah.
Here's
this
why.
Is going to tune in.
This is huge. This is just huge. It's huge. And we've kept this under wraps. I'm proud of us.
I really am proud of us too. And I will say that this took 18 months to pull off, something like that. It was a long time. Our guest next episode is Nick Mohammed, who you may know as Coach Nate on the Ted Lasso series.
How about that, everybody? No one was more excited than me. Even my wife, who does not listen to our podcast, I'll be honest, said, if you're talking to him, tell him how much we love him. Tell him how much. And so I did.
Well, and to his credit, there's been no guest who wanted to be on the show more than he did once we asked. He was very excited about it. He was just so busy that in order to get an hour of his time, it's like, well, no, he's at the Emmys. Well, no, he's making a movie. Well, no, he's in another country making a movie. No, he's doing a TV series. No. And we got a call from his agent or an email saying, Nick is shooting a movie. I forget where, I think he was in France.
Germany.
And
He was in Germany.
Germany. And he has tomorrow afternoon off. Can you do tomorrow afternoon? And we said, yes, that's morning here. We absolutely can do that. And then right before it happened, we got an email that said, they changed the schedule, but he's going to be around for an hour anyway. He still wants to do it. And when he got on, he was so excited and so delighted to talk about his interest in magic, which goes way, 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 way back. And he still does it today. I don't want to give away the whole interview. It's suffice it to say, he talks about magic as a kid and how he's doing it today and how he incorporates it into his own one-man shows that he's done at Edinburgh, how he has his character, Mr. Swallow, do it. And we'll have a clip in the show notes of him on a panel show, a game show in England when he brings his son on. His son doesn't mind reading routine. It is just phenomenal. So that is next episode. We will chat with the one, the only Coach Nate, Mr. Nick Mohammed himself.
And further proof that stars across the pond are accessible, and in a way that I'm sure if we tried to get, I can't even think of who the counterpart would be to Nick Mohammed at this point in American television. But think of the rigmarole you would have to go through in order to get, let's just say, Potsy from Happy Days on the show. He'd probably be easy to get.
Potsy we could get. No, there are, I could name some names. There are a couple we've tried that we just can't get through. You can't get through that layer. And with Nick, it was just find his agent. His agent they were just so nice, just back and forth. Email us again in April, email us again in July, email us again in September. And every time the agent said, he really wants to do this. He's not putting you off. He just doesn't have time. So anyway, that's next time. That'll be chapter 23. We're almost done with The Miser's Dream. And a great chat with Nick Mohammed. We will see you then.
I can't wait. I can't wait.
You gotta wait.
I don't want to.
This has been Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and Jim Cunningham. Produced by Alberts Bridge Books at Grass Lake Studios. Find this podcast and all the books in the Eli Marks series at elimarksmysteries.com. That's ELIMARKS Mysteries.com. And thanks for listening.